8th with Billy Ennis. And really, I'm going to turn it over to Billy and the group, and I'm going to record my mic, and I'm sorry, mute my mic and get this thing going.
Right on. Yeah, so thanks guys for having me. I really appreciate it. Dave prepped me with a bunch of questions, but I want you guys to throw out stuff at me. You have to remember that I've forgotten more things than you probably know. And that's not to say that's not an ego thing at all. It's just that the level that I operated at was relatively high, and a lot of things I take for granted. So if you're confused about anything, just shout out or raise your hand or just ask a question. But some background on me: I grew up in Queens. I grew up about 5 blocks away from Castina Velodrome, so I started in all the same places that you guys are, and are currently racing. I raced on the track first. I was a Cat 1 on the track and a Cat 4 on the road, so I did a little backwards because I like track a lot. But raced in the tri-state area a lot until I realized that I needed to get out of there because it was kind of its own little island. And much like France, unless you get out of there, you're going to be trapped in that system. So I know that there are a couple of questions about how do I get recognized by USAC and all that other stuff. And I understand that's always the main question. But one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is for you to test your skills and try your skills outside of the tri-state area as much as you possibly can. It's a great place to learn how to bike race because there is a lot of bike racing compared to other parts in the country outside of SoCal. So racing is really the best thing you can possibly do. I've had a lot of debates with a lot of coaches, even internally, even when I was inside USAC. They would say that, I don't want juniors to race too much. Well, my question is, compared to whom? I know that the Belgians race, the 15-16 Belgians race at minimum twice a week on the largest gear that they were permitted to use at the time was a 52-16. And they would race about an hour and a half, so 3 hours worth of racing every single week. The juniors were permitted to use a 52-14 and were allowed to race 3 kermesses a week. So that's about, on average, it was about 8 hours of racing. So if you look at it in terms of time, right, that's probably a lot more than 2 crits on a weekend. So there should be no question as to why the Belgians are better than we are. It's really comes down to that's simple math. I went to art school, but I can tell you that math doesn't play out in the long run for us. So what happens with American juniors is that they end up training a lot, which is fine. And I've seen some questions about functional threshold and 20-minute power and power files and things like that. That's what we're really good at. We're really good at training. We're not really good at racing. So my best advice that I can give you guys is race as much as possible, as many times as you possibly can, for multiple reasons. But one of the main reasons is that you learn the craft while you're doing it. Cycling is a very visual and mechanically learning type of sport, right? You can read as much as you want about cycling, but until you do it, you have no idea, right? You guys can read about, so I directed Junior Roubaix 6 times, I think, 6 or 7 times. There's nothing that can possibly prepare you for wet cobblestones unless you race on wet cobblestones. No amount of Zwift is going to teach you how to do that. So it's the same thing when I first moved out here to California. I had grown up racing in the rain because you race in Prospect Park and Central Park in New England. You're going to get a rainy crit. It's going to happen, right? I could out corner all my friends in California. I had the same tires, I had the same wheels, I had the same bike. This is back in the day when we used 32 spokes and low profile rims, but I had those skills. So those skills are developed only through racing. If I hadn't done those races in the rain, I wouldn't have had those skills, right? So same thing for you guys. Prospect Park is its own little world, but it's good for you to try different things. Can you get away on the flats? Can you get away on the hill? Can you get away in places that people don't expect you to? Try different things. Central Park is the same. Cat's Hill, all those little areas, you're young enough that you can try these things without a lot of consequence because you can race a lot. You know what I mean? You, especially as a junior, the good and bad thing about being a junior in America is that you can jump in pro fields. That's a debate all the time. Juniors in Belgium and Europe cannot race with anybody else other than juniors. but that's because they have a lot of juniors. So race as much as you can with older guys. Yeah, it's really frustrating because you guys are gear limited, but I heard that that's gone away now. So you guys can use open gears, which that's a whole nother debate that I don't want to get into. But I think it's good in certain, especially if you're racing in America. So yeah, race as much as you possibly can. I don't really have any other advice other than that. I think that the training has changed quite a bit. A lot of people now are focused on files and focused on 20-minute power. But let me ask you guys, when was the last time you guys rode flat out for 20 minutes in a bike race? Yeah, right. So it's good and bad. So 20-minute tests are good for certain things. They're not good for all things. So I think when I was looking at files, I was really interested in 1 minute and 5-minute power, because junior racing, if you look at your power profile, you're never at 20 minutes, right? It's never like straight across a straight line, unless you're in a breakaway, which is a whole nother discussion. But most of the time you're doing this and then it's zero. Then it's 500 watts and then it's zero, right? And then there's like 5 minutes because everyone loses their mind and tries to attack. And then there's like zero and you're back to 1 minute. So the repetition of that was really interesting to me. The second thing that I would look at when I would look at files, because people would send me files all the time when I was in charge, and they're like, "Oh, this is my file from this day." I'm like, "Okay, cool. Can you give me a month-long amount of files?" Because you send me one file, and it's like my point of reference is one file, and it's one race, right? So if you give me a month long, I can kind of look at other things, and then eventually you get to the point where the head coach or the director, when I was working out, I would have access to your training peaks, and I could look at everything. What I would look for is, so I could tell you a funny story on the side, but what I would look for was who is getting the best result with the least amount of power output. So it's different than what you guys think, right? So a lot of juniors, I can tell you a quick story. So in 2019, Quinn Simmons was a junior and Magnus Sheffield was a first-year junior. And they would come back after the races and they'd be like, "Oh, my normalized power was 320. Oh, mine was 330. And Luke Lamperti, who I was coaching at the time, would come back and he was like, "Yeah, but I was third and my normalized power was 240. Right? So he was a clever bike racer. And he knew where to dole out that power at the right parts during the bike race. A person that's sitting outside of the pack the entire time is putting out a lot of power, right? Obviously. Person that's always sneaking through the field and being really, really clever. And Dave and I can talk about guys that we knew back in the day when we were racing that were really, really clever bike racers and didn't put out a lot of power and were always on the podium. Those are interesting athletes to me when I was running the show. Results mean everything. And that's always a question that I would get. Like, how does USAC recognize athletes? Results are the main thing. Power profiles and people that come out of the woodwork out of nowhere, like, yes, that happens from time to time. But to me, when I was running the program, I was very interested in the podium, obviously, but I was also looking for consistency. So the kid that was always sixth, or the athlete that was always seventh, and was like 20 seconds off the group or 30 seconds off the group, that's an interesting athlete to me because that delta is small. Changing that kid that's always top 10 to podium is a small delta compared to a kid that's first and then 80th. And then 10th, and then 3 weeks later, he's 90th and he drops out, right? So you have those hit and misses depending on the athlete and depending on what the athlete's really, really good at. But when kids would come to me and say, "I'm a sprinter," and they're like, "Oh, I'm a climber," and I'd be like, "Okay, cool. How many pack sprints have you won?" And the kids are, "Well, none." "Okay, well, when are you winning sprints?" I win them out of a breakaway. I'm like, "Oh, you're a road sprinter." But even then, you're just a junior, so let's not talk about that. And then the kid is like, "I'm a climber." I'd be like, "Cool, how many mountaintop finishes have you won?" He would look at me with his mouth open, and I'm like, you're good at climbing, but you're not a climber until you win mountaintop races. Or I'm good at time trialing. Okay, cool. How many time trials have you won? Right? See, all you guys, you want to put yourself in these little buckets, but allow yourselves to be bike racers. Be good at everything. Try everything. Try as many disciplines as you possibly can, too. So that was a question I saw, like, should I concentrate on one thing? Should I try to win nationals? Yeah, winning nationals is really important. But a kid that's third at mountain bike nationals and fourth at cyclocross nationals and third at road nationals, like, that's a really interesting kid to me, right? And any athlete would say, oh, that's consistency across the board. That's really important. So yeah, try as many things as you can. Christopher Blevins, you guys all know who Christopher Blevins is? Yeah. He was a BMX national champion. And then he won cyclocross. He beat Gage Hecht to a national title. Now he races professional mountain bikes. But before he did all that, he came with me and he won the junior peace race on the road. So he's just good, right? So good athletes are good athletes. So try everything you possibly can. I get questions sometimes about running. Should I run in the winter? That's up to you. Like, doing a little bit of jogging and running, is it going to hurt you? No, you guys are young. Totally fine. So Roglic, you guys know Roglic. He won some bike races in his time. He goes for a jog every morning before the tour stages. Like, yeah, world tour athlete. He's not right in the head. I'm going to say that right now. Like, he's a little bit crazy, but at the same time, that's his process. He's figured that out. That's good for him. You know, I used to really like going for a walk after dinner, no matter what, when I raced. Now, obviously, I didn't reach high levels. Yes, I was professional, and yes, I raced in Europe and did all these things, but I'm not even a footnote in cycling. But I liked going for a walk after dinner because it would clear my head. You know what I mean? And even before a race, it's not that big of a deal. So for you to try different things, like, take that risk. I don't see why it would hurt you at all. You know, BMX is not for everyone, obviously, because BMX has changed since Dave and I were racing. Like, now there's a giant ramp and you're doing like 60 miles an hour at the bottom of it. I wouldn't suggest that, but, you know, tootling on your BMX bike and trying different things, riding is riding, guys. It's just going to make you better. All the miles that you put in make you better. That was a question too, I think, Dave, about training, right? So yeah, training has changed in ways, but there's really no substitute for time on the bike. Like, being on your bike, even if it's riding super slow and, you know, you're riding with friends and you end up doing a 5-hour day, which I don't recommend you do all the time, but like, you're out there and you're eating muffins and snacks and cookies and doing all these things. Like, riding bikes is riding bikes, and you're going to get better no matter what. And time in is always effort out in what you do. So Trainer Road and Zwift and all these programs are patterns. And as a young athlete, when you set yourself up on a pattern, you will get better. It may not be for everybody. Like, I personally hate the trainer, and I'll tell you why in a second. But certain people really, really like the trainer. I live in Northern California. The weather here is pretty good all the time. Never mind an atmospheric river every now and then. But I can ride outside all the time. I hate the trainer because when I was training for Team Pursuit, we spent an inordinate amount of time on the trainer. And because it was so focused and so controlled with power and heart rate that I can't stand it now. But for people that I know, even living in Northern California, they ride Zwift 3 times a week out here because of jobs or because of whatever, or because they like to control. Hour and a half in, they're off the bike. So it just depends on what you want to do. So if you don't like Zwift, totally fine. But you're going to have to go outside if you want to get better, even when it's bad. And meaning, if it's freezing cold, like, you're going to get cold. That's just the way it is. Every year, I would take the best cyclists in the country over to the Spring Classics. We do Hent Wevelgem, we would do Roubaix. These kids that were coming from SoCal and the West, and they would have miles and miles and miles in their legs. And we would get absolutely destroyed by Dutch kids and Belgian kids. And I don't know if you guys have ever lived through a Belgian winter, but I can tell you, it's not like Spain. And the kids are not going to Spain every week. These kids are hard. They ride when it's 40 degrees and raining. They do not spend time inside. They ride outside, and it's part of the culture. And especially in Belgium, like, Belgian kids are hard. They want to win as much as anybody, and they will do anything they possibly can to win. And that's because they don't have 20 sports to choose from. So you guys are all cycling. cycling is a niche sport in America, right? It's not baseball, it's not football, it's not hockey, it's not even NASCAR. So I applaud the courage that you guys have to undertake this endeavor, because it is really challenging. In Belgium, there's cycling and then there's football, meaning soccer. That's it. Like, there's no other sport. And cycling is very, very serious over there. I have seen parents screaming at their kid because they didn't win a bike race, as if it was life and death. And for them, it may very well be, because the options that those kids have are much different than you guys. So you guys can go to college. You can go to college and you can still race. Those kids are going to end up working in a factory. And it's no slight against the country, but their university systems are different. Like, those kids don't take SATs and get into college. Like, that's not the culture there. So for them, it is life and death sometimes, that they have to win, or they have to be top 10, they have to turn pro. But they also have this development system in place that's able to happen, right? So we don't have that many domestic teams that you guys can get on, unfortunately, which is really, it's poor. It's very, very poor. And I'm not going to lie to you guys about it. It was much different than when Gen X, my generation, was racing. You could make a living racing criteriums and doing well, but you had a robust development program. You had a robust grassroots program. You had all these races that you can do. So Belgium has that, and France has that, and all the European countries have it. So it's very European based. So one of the questions was, can I go to college and still race? Absolutely. And you should. You should think about it. If college is not for you, that's a different story. But if it is, you can definitely race your bike. And some of the colleges have great programs that you can do. But that's not to say that when you get to the upper levels, as I've seen, kids continue to go to college or take time to take classes. Unfortunately, they don't. The women's peloton, on the other hand, is highly intelligent compared to the men's peloton. And I don't know why that is, other than I think a lot of times female athletes come into the sport a little bit later. They come in from soccer or swimming, or they got injured from volleyball, and they end up in cycling. And so they already have their degree and do these things. But I can tell you, even when I was racing as much as I possibly can, as I was, and I was training 20 hours a week, well, I can tell you that there's 20 other hours in the work week that are available, right? So if you looked at your day and you have 24 hours in the day, and all you guys have 24 hours, you got 6 of which are probably at school, 6 or 8, right, are in school. And then you're supposed to sleep 8 or 9 hours a night, but you're not. So how do you occupy your time after that? We're only up to 16 hours, right? So you got to eat. There's 3 hours out of your day. What are we up to? 19? And you're riding 3 hours a day, right? So you're close. But then those times and all those hours that you're spending on social media, I don't know, what's that doing for you? But one of the questions I saw was, what are the biggest mistakes a junior has made? You guys don't get enough sleep. That's what it comes down to. I'm telling you right now, because I've seen it. You guys know who Sean Quinn is on EF Education? American guy on EF, right? So when he was a junior, he was good. He was almost always in the front group. But if the front group was 20 guys or 19 guys, he was 18th or 19th. And I'd walk upstairs in the house, because we'd all live in this little house in Belgium or sometimes in the Netherlands, and his light would be on at 1 o'clock in the morning. So I had this long talk with Sean. And I was like, you're getting 4 hours or 5 hours of sleep, and you're in the front group, but you're not in the front of the front group. And that's a small change. That's probably those 3 hours a night that you're not getting. And once he started sleeping, he started getting better, which was weird, right? Weird, not weird. It's not complicated, guys. If you ride hard, train hard, and race hard, you have to recover hard. That's probably more important to you guys right now, because you're growing and your bodies are changing, and radically. Like, puberty hits and things go haywire, right? And then I've seen it from 15. I knew Matteo Jorgensen when he was tiny, tiny, tiny. And Brandon McNulty when he was like, he looked like an olive on a toothpick. He was so tiny, right? And super small and super short. But that dude could nap anywhere. And Mateo would nap all the time. And that's just human growth hormone being released. HGH is normal in your body. But the only time it comes out is when you're resting. So if you're getting 5 hours of sleep a night, that needs to change, and especially during the winter. And one of the reasons is because when it's cold, your body requires more nutrients to stay warm. So it's working almost twice as hard, unless you're completely overdressed, which is almost impossible in the Northeast because I've lived through it. It's brutal. It's cold. So you have to eat and you have to drink and you have to do all these things. And then off the bike, you super need to chill, like really, really chill out and do different things, stretching and all the things off the bike. Those are just as important as the things on the bike. So if you're doing, or you're clicking through social media for 2 hours a day and you're telling me you don't have time to stretch, like as a coach, I wouldn't buy that. Like, sorry. Especially if you're serious about cycling. Like that's not an excuse to me. Like looking at other people's lives is an excuse. You know what I mean? I know social media is like, I get it. But you're always comparing. Like it's a weird thing. But I would see it all the time because the kids would sit right after the ride, immediately pull out the phone and look at all these other riders that were doing things in Belgium. And I was like, why are you guys comparing yourselves to the Belgian kids? Like, it doesn't matter what they do. Like, you have to worry about what you do. And as soon as that mindset would change, all of a sudden we were winning everything. And that's not an egotistical thing to say because in 2019, we basically won everything. And we probably could have won more in 2020 as well because the team was amazing. But they had changed some things and changed the things that they had looked at and thought were serious, right? All of a sudden, the guys were stretching after a ride and the phones were away for a while. And they were making food right away as soon as they got back to the house, and then they would nap and look at their phones and do that stuff, but they were just laying down. So do the things off the bike as well as on the bike. Anyone can ride a bike. Anyone can train. Super, super easy. But the roads are littered with good cyclists. A lot of guys are good. Not a lot of guys are great. And the greatest ones have always separated themselves out by doing all the things off the bike really, really well, just as well as on the bike. And that means sleeping and eating well and taking the time to recover, making sure their bikes were perfect. Magnus was fastidious about his bike. Some athletes don't care because we had a mechanic and he would take care of everything, but Magnus always checked. I think it's really important because cycling, I grew up as a mechanic because cycling was expensive. Bicycles are expensive to maintain. You can ask your parents. It's expensive. But things you can learn to cheapen it, to lessen the impact, is learning how to change your chain on your own. That's really, really cheap to do and inexpensive and easy to do. Ask a mechanic to show you how to do it. Those of you with disc brakes, learn how to change your brake pads and service your discs and your calipers. Like, that's just time, but rubbing discs nowadays and rubbing calipers, like, that's easy. You can maintain that on your own. It's super simple. Buying a torque wrench is a really good thing too. Little things like that, but maybe that's for later. But you have to ask people to teach you how to do that. So one of the questions was, what's the best piece of equipment a junior can have? I thought that was funny. So I thought about that when I was riding today, and I would say your parents' car. That's the most important one because unless you guys are driving yourselves to the bike races, like, you need them. So that's the most important piece of equipment that you can have. And thank them every time they take you to a bike race. Or if you're getting in the team van with a team director, thank the team director as well. I think the second most important thing is probably a really, really good set of wheels. I realize now that a lot of riders, and I've seen it over in Europe, they're sponsored by wheel manufacturers and they have to ride these aero wheels all the time. I first saw it with Action. They were sponsored by Zip, and all of a sudden they were training on Zip 404s, which are 40 millimeter carbon clinchers. Well, you're fast all the time, and then when you get to the races, you're using the same exact thing, but back then they were using tubular, so they'd have the tubular version of it. Nowadays, everyone is running. I imagine probably all you guys are running tubeless or thereabouts, or So yeah, it's just fast all the time, right? So if you can, if you can buy a cheaper set of training wheels and use those to train on, when you put your race wheels on, it feels much, much better. Now, I understand that that's an expense, and if you can't do that, that's totally fine. But then buy a really good set of wheels and have a really good set of tires and maintain them. Meaning that if there's any cuts or anything in your tires, like that's not an expensive thing to replace in the grand scheme of things, right? An $80 tubeless tire, like at least you know you're not going to get flats. That's a good thing to invest in. TT bikes are a whole nother discussion. Like I know at the upper levels, obviously TT bikes are really important. If you're going to go to nationals and you're going to do the time trial, you're probably going to have to invest in a space shuttle of some sort, and that's going to be expensive. And the main thing about that, you're just equating the playing field. That's all you're doing. Like if you play baseball, any of you play baseball at one point, maybe a couple of you, right? So it's all aluminum bats when you're young, right? Well, imagine the one kid who shows up with like a 42-ounce wood bat at a little league. Like you don't want to be that kid at nationals if you're trying to win the time trial, right? You want to bring the best equipment and make sure it's even. It's expensive though. It's really expensive, unfortunately. I don't know. Am I off track, Dave? I'm sort of rambling here. Dave, you have any other questions? Throw them out.
So, I mean, I'm just going to kind of go over something kind of funny. Billy and I only text. We don't talk that often, but you probably heard him say a lot of the similar things that I say all the time. I don't know if you guys caught that. I mean, there's phrases that are almost exactly identical to what he said on this call. And that's why I'm like super stoked to have Billy here to talk to the group, to give like an outside view of, you know, what cycling really, in my opinion, really is. Like, what is cycling? I mean, there was like a couple of phrases he said that I was like, wait, did he get that from me 20 years ago? like, you know, these kind of phrases. So, you know, again, I just want to say thanks for Billy coming by. And, you know, this one's a little more informal. Some of his chats and stuff he does, he has like PowerPoints and all this kind of stuff. But we're really just taking this one a little bit on the easier side.
Okay.
And there's like a few notes that I kind of want to go over that he did touch on, which is absolutely, and this is true with our team, try multiple disciplines. You know, we did some cyclocross this year. Quite a few of the kids do NICA mountain biking.
Great.
And then there's one element, which I'm going to ask Billy, if you want to be good on the road, other than racing road, what is the one thing that you really suggest? What other discipline do you really think where you go round and round in circles?
Yeah, well, I think that if you can get on the velodrome, it's so good for you. Racing on the track is excellent. There's no place to hide on the track, so it appeals to a left brain type person at a certain level. It's very interesting. So because it's just math and time, and it appeals to the people that I've met, especially the women's national team and the men's national team. They're all really good at math, which is, to me, was really fascinating. I don't know whether it was just the confluence of events, but they all liked the fact that it was time and distance, because the track is enclosed, right? It's the road. Okay, you know the circuit is 10K long, or 20K long or whatever, but like a track is 200 meters or 250 or 300 or 333. So it's finite, and the timing of things is much different. 200-meter track, things happen a lot faster than 333. Obviously, or 250. Like you have to prepare yourself almost a lap ahead of time. But there's no place to hide. You're either really, really good at the track or you're really, really not. Like the mediocrity is it's not really there. But I think it can really, really help you, even if you're not good at it. It is an excellent place to learn how to race your bike. And being technically savvy. So that you learn the skills that you learn on the track are easily transferable to the road. So learning how to steer your bike with your hips, and it's like there's not a lot of movement on a track bike, obviously, because you're kind of locked in. And yeah, it's kind of weird to be locked in, but how you shift your weight is similar to mountain biking. If you know you steer with your hips on a mountain bike, you know, you allow the suspension to compress, and you get it to carve, you get it to turn. The same kind of thing with the track bike, like, 'cause you have the banking, you have all this physics, but it's a lot of fun. And it can be really frustrating. Don't get me wrong, because I raced a lot of track, but it's definitely going to make you faster. Like that spin and that sprint and that snap, those are things that never go away. And you learn them. You only learn them really on the track. So if you can get a cheap track bike, especially a Casino, because it's not obviously it's not a 250 wood world-class velodrome, but like a decent steel track bike or aluminum track bike, and heading down to Casino, and if you can race down there, like I think you should. Mountain biking definitely helps, like for sure. There's no way around that. Mountain biking is excellent for all sorts of things, especially for torque, because it's so steep, and you're forced to use these gears that you normally wouldn't use, and you got to get your weight over the bike, and you learn balance really well on a mountain bike as well. But yeah, all the disciplines are really good, but velodrome for sure. Velodrome for sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, just some kind of general kind of questions, or just some general stuff. A couple of the riders are going into their 17-18s,
Okay.
or this will be their last year. Either they're going into or their last year. So, with that said, I mean, what do you suggest for those riders? Some of them are going to go to college. Wait a minute, Billy, you went to school in Colorado, right?
Me, no, Purchase up in Westchester.
Okay,
Mhm.
that was maybe it was Keith. Maybe that. Okay,
Keith went
because Wolf
to CU. Yeah.
CU. So Wolfie, where you got into CU, right? Yeah.
Nice.
So he's going to CU. But what? Okay, it's your last year or last 2 years of being a 17-18 junior. Like this is it. What
Right.
would be keep in mind that these are either brand new Cat 3s or potentially Cat 4s, but they're serious about cycling and they want to go somewhere. What would be the primary recommendation for somebody who's that age set? Like what should they do?
Well, I think that even if you're racing at Cat 4 or Cat 3 level and you absolutely love the sport, look for a college that has a robust ride scene. So I coached this kid in Iowa for a little while this year, and he was from Ames, Iowa, which is tiny. I think 4,000 people. There's probably 25,000 cows. But he went to college in Des Moines, and he knew that there were riders in Des Moines, but he didn't realize like how good the ride scene was when he first moved there. And I was still coaching him through a couple of years of college. All of a sudden, he had access to 5 group rides a week or something like that, right? So Colorado is the same. California is the same. You have these little hot spots. Bentonville, in Arkansas, which I never would have thought of, but yeah, it's one of those places. So if you love it, look for colleges that have really good ride culture. And it doesn't necessarily have to be race culture. It just means that you're around people that are like-minded, and being in and around riders. So when I went to school in Purchase, so I went to art school. It's a long story about how I got into cycling, but one of the main reasons is because I was working as a mechanic, like I said, and so I got this job. I went to school. I knew where I wanted to go to school, but then I got this job at the local bike shop, and it was like a 20-minute ride from college. And the guy that owned the shop raced a lot, and so I got into cycling kind of late. Like I always rode, but I wasn't very good, as a junior, and I didn't really get into it until I got into college, because I was around this guy who was just his personality was so magnetic and wanted me to race, and he helped me. He taught me more than I ever learned until I got to Europe. He just knew how to race and knew how to do things. And he also ran a bike shop, so things were cheap, which was great. Tires were a little cheaper for me when I was racing, but he knew how to train. I knew how to ride a bike, but I didn't know how to train. So he would take me on these sprint workouts and these long hilly days, and all of this, all of a sudden I was getting better and better and better. So if you're in Colorado, if you're in Iowa someplace, or you decide to go to college, and I know Milligan College has a really good program. Marion, obviously they give scholarships. They also have a track right nearby. But you're around these people that are going to make you better. And a lot of cyclists, I made this mistake, guys. I thought I could do this all on my own. I coached myself. I took myself to races. I was a little bit older, obviously, but I did all these things on my own, and I made huge mistakes, meaning I didn't listen to the people around me. Yes, I listened to the guy that I was working for. And yes, I listened to some people that I was riding with. But I was like, oh, no, I'll just figure this out on my own because I know what I'm doing. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. And then my perspective changed a lot in 1997 when I moved to Belgium to race. And now I'm around people that cycling is life. Like life. This is all they do. There was this guy that I used to ride with. He was a soigneur on a pro team. So he worked nonstop and we would go ride together and he would tell me stories and tell me things to do. Right. I rode with this guy he was a pro in Belgium and he would take me around the Tour of Flanders loop and he'd tell me stories about this is where this guy attacked. This is where, and he had ridden the Tour of Flanders 4 times. And he'd tell me, this is where you have to go hard. This is where you need, and those things translated later in life when we were going to bike races, because I knew all those roads. I know all the roads in Het-Wevelgem. I know all the sectors that Junior Paris-Roubaix is, right? But that was knowledge that I got from other people. So Wolfie, you go into Colorado, you're going to be around all these people that cycling is their life, and listen to them. Take as much advice and don't be afraid to ask questions. And all you guys that decide to go to college, wherever it is, if you want to go to college and still ride, you may have to start your own culture there, or you could be integrated into a culture where you go, which is a lot easier. I can tell you that. Starting your own culture is hard, but going to a place that has good ridership and good people you can train with and ride with, even if they're slower than you, even if they're faster than you, ride with them. You know what I mean? A good wolf pack is much better than a lone wolf. I can tell you that.
So what would kind of a suggestion be for, let's say, I know you touched on this earlier about racing as much as you can, but younger, younger cyclists,
Yeah.
because for instance, my own son is a baby and Sylvan is still 13, I think, right?
I'm turning 14 like
Right.
2 weeks.
Yeah. So what would be sort of what kind of path should they look at? Because sometimes it's a little bit harder
Yeah.
to race with the adults. It used to be that they race with the masters. I don't understand why that doesn't happen anymore. That made the most sense. But
Yeah.
now, so for a younger rider, what would be sort of a path to, get better, still have fun, and get noticed for a younger rider?
Right. So the younger rider thing it's interesting to me because there are all these outliers all the time. A kid that's super serious at 12, 13. And I would see it in Belgium quite a bit. So they had races they call cadets over there. So there's 3 in Belgium. There's cadets, Nieuwelingen, and juniors. Juniors are 17, 18. Nieuwelingen, which means basically new rider, is 15, 16. And then cadets are everything below. So 14 and younger. What I would see, like they would race maybe once a week. Like it wasn't that much and they were shorter. But I would see them all the time on group rides, especially in the Netherlands where we were. And you'd see that a lot. Like the mentorship model was always there. You had these older guys, like everybody in the Netherlands was a pro. And so it's like you'd see these groups of, 10, 12 guys, and then you'd have these little kids in the back just like spinning like mad because they're gear limited and they'd be riding along. So it has to be fun, especially at that age. Like no matter what they're doing, it has to be a lot of fun. Obviously, racing is a lot more fun than training, but if the racing is limited, then keep it as fun as possible. For it to be more and more, like I think it gets serious, a little bit more serious at 15, 16, and then it gets pretty serious at 17, 18. It still needs to be fun the whole way through, but it's a lot more fun winning races than it is losing races. I can tell you that, obviously. But you're going to lose more than you win. That's just part of it. So I think for the younger guys, like just riding as much as possible with people that are going to make you better, that's going to be okay for the time being. I think if you can find other series to race in, like NICA or even Cross, but I don't really understand. I'm with you, David. Like I don't really understand the whole dynamic of what USAC is trying to do right now. That's a whole nother discussion. But what do you do with? It's a very good question. Like, what do you do with this younger generation, and where do they go? And what can they possibly do if there's not a lot of races for them to do? So it's a very good question. But I think keeping it as fun as possible is really the main thing, and not training too much.
Here's another question that goes to pinpoint to both all the age groups of juniors and even not adults is the upgrade process. I mean, do you think that it's important to, I know that, we've had these team meetings where we went over our goals, we had a team meeting and we literally got together, and communication is key to make a team work. But one of the things we asked, was, some guys are like, oh, I want to be a Cat 3. Oh, I want to be a pro. Those are like vastly different things.
Yeah.
And, it used to be, and Billy knows this because we raced together, when you went from 3 to 2, that was basically turning pro, because there were pros back then and you raced pro and 2 and it was a different animal. So, we called it Cat 3 Pro. You turn straight to pro. But what the real question here is, do you think should, if people have the performance and the points, oh, I got enough points, should I upgrade to a 4? Or sorry, to a 3? Should I upgrade to a 2? I mean, how do you feel about upgrading as a junior in general?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think it really depends on the I think it depends on the athlete. I think it depends on the maturity of the athlete. So when you look at certain athletes, and so the Belgians have the saying all the time when a rider turns pro, they would always ask him, like, oh, does he look young? Now, this is a rule of thumb and one of those weird Belgian questions, right? But they want to know basically, like, does he still have baby fat in his face and is he going to develop? Right? So I've had athletes that, like Quinn Simmons is a specimen. He just looked like, he looked like a man. He had full beard at 17, right? And so you're going to be better. George Hincapie had a full beard at 14 years old. And, he had so much testosterone running through his system that there's really no stopping that, right? And that cream is always going to rise to the top no matter what. And so that's a question that I would get all the time. Like, well, what happens to all these other kids that don't hit puberty at a certain time? Why don't they don't upgrade at the right times? So I think to Dave, I hate to give you an ambiguous answer, but it really, really depends on the athlete. I think that the upgrade system that we have in this country, I hate to use this term, but it is what it is. I don't necessarily agree. I wish we were at the point where we could just call everyone a junior. So there's no upgrade. There's no categories in Europe. You're either junior or you're an elite. They call it elite zone de contract, which is an amateur, or you're a pro, or you're a master. And masters, like, I've seen 40-year-olds racing against 60-year-olds. Like, that's all there is. So there's none of this like category system. So I think for you guys, upgrading is great to do, but how does that fit into the goals that you're going to have, right? So if you want to do Somerville, I remember when I was racing, Somerville was always the biggest crit you want to get into because it had the biggest money. But I think you had to be a Cat 2 or a Cat 1. You had to apply like straight away. I don't know if it's still like that, but say Redlands, for instance, if you guys want to travel to go to Redlands, Redlands, you have to be a Cat 1. And as a junior, you need to be a Cat 1 to do it. And at this point, Redlands is now like a junior race. Like when we were racing it, I'd show up and like the Postal Service would be there. So the pro teams would all be there. Those days are gone. So is it good to upgrade? Yes. Do you need to be a Cat 1 at 16 years old? No, definitely not. Do you need to be a Cat 1 by the time you're 18 or 19? Maybe. But it depends on what you want to do. And it depends on your development. I think if you're only in the sport for a couple of years and you're a Cat 4 and your goal is I want to be a Cat 3 by the time I'm out of 16, by 17, I want to be like a Cat 2. Like you could be a Cat 2 because you're racing all the same races, right? So if you're mixing the categories, if it's still Pro 1, 2, or if it's 1, 2, 3, what are you gaining by being a Cat 2 and a Cat 1 if you're still racing with the same guys, right? So if you want to do Gila, that's a different story. If you want to do America's Dairyland, do you need to be a Cat 1 to do Dairyland? Probably not.
I think, does anybody remember? I know U23, you have to be a certain category to do nationals. You have to be a certain category as a junior to do, so you just have to be a 3.
Yeah. Got to be a 3.
Yeah. So anyone can do the TT at nationals, that I know, across the board. Anyone can jump in that race, but I think you have to be a Cat 2 to be U23, I believe.
And then Cat 3 for 17, 18 junior, and then the rest doesn't matter.
Right.
I just bring this up because racing's changed quite a lot. There's whatever, 5 Novas, 4 5s, 3 4s, 1 2 3s, and as Billy pointed out, basically becoming a 3 gets you the most bang for the buck, depending on what you want to do. But if you want to go somewhere and do bigger things, then you have to engineer your schedule and your training and your fitness and the travel to get those points to become a 2.
Yeah.
Because some of you guys are 17, 18, which means you'll soon be U23. So looking ahead 1 or 2 years, okay, if you want to do U23 nationals, you have to be a 2.
Yeah.
And that's just why I brought some of that up. And
I think nationals is always a good goal. I never understood, even when I was racing, guys would be like, "Oh, I'm not going to go to nationals this year," and "Oh, I'm not fit, or I'm not this, or I'm not that." And it's like, go to nationals. It's the only time you're going to see all the juniors together in one spot. Like, no matter what, it's the only time that you'll see the best guys there, and then you get perspective from that. So I'll tell you a quick story. So I knew this guy from Cincinnati, and there was one year the nationals were in Cincinnati, and he was a really good bike racer. Well, like I said before, he was good, but he was absolutely convinced that he was going to win nationals. And I'm looking at this, and we were at a training camp together in the beginning of the year. I looked at this guy. I asked him, I was like, "Kirk, have you ever raced in California?" No, I'm good. Like, okay. And in my head, I'm from New York City, and I'm like, there's no way this guy's going to win nationals. Like, there's absolutely no way. Because all the best bike racers that I was seeing, because I was traveling around now for about a year, were coming from California because of the terrain, because of whatever. And he went to nationals. We went to nationals. I think I ended up 10th, and he was dropped. And a kid from California won. I was like, I could have told you that was going to happen. And I think it was like the top 6 were all from California for whatever reason that year. But it was always like that. But you're not going to get that perspective of the things you need to do unless you're around those riders that you're able to see. My eyes were wide open when I moved to Belgium. I thought I knew how to race my bike. No idea. I had no idea. I thought I knew what it was like to go fast and go hard. Nope. I thought I knew how to race in the rain. Nope. The same thing when I was racing in Italy. So I lived in Colorado for a while, and I had this chance to go race in Italy for a while, and I did. And I thought I knew how to descend until I went down a mountain with some guys from Mappe. And I learned a lot. But it was the only way that I was going to learn that is by being there. So the same thing for you guys. Nationals is always a good goal, especially for you younger guys that are maybe not ready to go there and maybe not ready to go. Just go. I don't know what that means. I'm not ready. I don't know what that means. What does that mean? Just go. Like, you have nothing to lose. You're so young. Yeah, you always have to look 3 years ahead, for sure. It's important to see that because at 17, in 2 years, you're going to be 19. So that's pretty important. But go as much as you possibly can.
So let's talk a little bit about, there's only one guy that wins a bike race, which is exactly in the word that Billy just said, which is race your bike. Okay, like there's only one guy that wins. So to me, it's like people are like, well, I don't want to go to this. I'm like, why not? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There's only a few things that happen in a bike race. You win, you don't win, you crash, and that's it. There's like 3 things. There's one guy that wins, and so mindset wise, like, this is more a mentality of like dealing with, there's only one winner of a bike race. Is there any kind of others, suggestions, topics, having worked with,
Yeah.
I mean, if you guys don't know, he, produced the best guys in the world. Like, like, it's just like, but you can't always win. So is there any kind of mindset to that you could pass forward?
Yeah, definitely. I'll expand on that a little bit, but there's only 2 ways to win a bike race. There's only 2. There are no other ways. Right? Think about it for a second. You can win by a sprint, or you can win by yourself. Those are the only 2 ways. 2. Time trial, you're by yourself. So that doesn't count. But if you're sprinting against 3 guys, you're still sprinting. Or you're winning by yourself. So these are things that I would tell the guys all the time. Everyone would be like, no, there's more ways to win a bike race. No, there's not. No, there's only 2. So which is the best way for you? One thing I used to tell the guys, so there's this Viking proverb, well, two things, but there's this Viking proverb that the lazy wolf gets no sheep. And I would say this to the guys all the time. So Mateo, I have a good story about Mateo. So all the guys you saw on the tour this year, all those riders came through my program. Every single one of them. And they learned, and I was chatting with them and talking with them the entire time that they were in the tour. Mateo was the most frustrated, obviously, because Mateo was in a lot of breakaways but didn't really convert. But that's okay. And we had long text streams, and I said, "You're finally a wolf." So when he was a junior, he is a thinker. He's very smart, comes from a smart family, and he would overthink the situation a lot. Get to bike races and he would overthink it. So there was no unconscious competence. There's this whole graph. I'll show you in a later date when I have a presentation, Dave. I can show you this graph. I love it. But it's one of these things that you want to get to the point, and the reason why I tell you guys to race as much as possible is one of the reasons is because so it becomes routine. So there's no nervousness. And that was always something I would suffer from when I first started racing. I would get really, really nervous before bike races. So I would try to race as much as possible and I'd have my routine down. And then by the time I got to nationals a couple of years later, like it was just a bike race. Yeah, they give you a free shirt. Okay. If you win, but it's still just a bike race like every other. And the process was the same. So when we were leading, we were always going to worlds. So for 9 years or 10 years, then taking teams to worlds. And I was like, hey man, this is a bike race like last week. They just give you a unicorn fart t-shirt. And all the kids would laugh. And I'm like, they're like, oh, it's a rainbow jersey. And I'm like, no, it's a unicorn fart shirt. So the guys started joking, right? So I was bringing the seriousness of the situation down a little bit. I'm like, hey man, let's just race our bikes as pretty as we possibly can today. You know what I mean? And I would say that every year. And some years we do really well, have some guys in the top 10. And some years it would go pear-shaped, but we always tried. We always tried to do something. And I'd always tell them that thing about the wolf. I was like, don't be lazy. Lazy wolf doesn't eat, right? And I'd look at the 5 guys and 6 guys at the team, and I was like, but you're all wolves. So going back to Mateo. So Mateo would overthink and overthink and overthink. And we had this long talk one time. I was like, are you a wolf or are you a sheep? And of course he looks at me and he's like, what? I'm like, I'm asking you, are you a wolf or are you a sheep? Because I see you in bike races. I'm in the car. I'm car 1 or car 2, and I'm watching. And you're following and you're following and following, and then, a little bit of separation, and then and he would just do the mental thing, and then he would just come back to the group. This was when he was a first year, so he was 17. And I saw it when he was 16 too. But at 18, I'm like, hey man, like, you want to turn pro and you want to do all these things? Like, are you a sheep or are you a wolf? And I was like, you don't have to answer me right away. And he didn't. About a week later, we did this bike race, and it was like new Mateo, like Mateo 2.0, and he was a wolf. And then he had some sidetracks because he didn't get on the right U23 team, whatever that means. He told it to me one time, and I don't know what that means. And then he worked his way back. He was on Jelly Belly. Next thing you know, he's on Movistar. And everyone's surprised. Everyone's like, why is Mateo on Movistar? And I had this conversation with this guy, this agent that I knew. And I was like, I looked at him, I was like, because he's a wolf. I'm like, you're stupid not to think that. And the agent's like, oh, we'll see. So after the tour this year, I texted the agent. I was like, you see what I'm saying now? And he's like, yes.
I think, Billy, you went your mic. You might have hit the space bar.
Oh, I did? Sorry. Oh,
yeah,
what did I miss? So it's the development of Mateo came over time. It took time. So, and all those little sidetracks that he had, but he's still a wolf. And I'll watch him this year in the tour, and I'm not going to say I expect big things because expectations are weird, but I'd be really surprised if he didn't have a fantastic tour. Really, really surprised. But it takes everybody a little bit more time,
All right, so let's open this up to the mystery question that you guys have probably alluded by now. I gave Billy all of your questions. So what I'm going to do is mute my mic, and Sylvan's got a question right here. Let's do a Q&A because we're coming up on the 1 hour point.
Okay.
And Sylvan has a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask Billy. Talk with Billy.
Like, is it good to do like multiple sports, not to stick, like, if you want to get good, you would like to be doing multiple, could you,
yeah. No, I think you should. Yeah. If you want to play, so Evenepoel, Remco Evenepoel, right? So he was obviously junior world champion, really amazing. So he turned down a pro football scholarship. And I don't mean American football. That's American egg ball. This is football, soccer. He played soccer, and he still plays soccer a little bit. So yeah, I think especially at your age, I think it's good to do multiple sports. You guys know Alexei Vermeulen? So Alexei Vermeulen raced cross-country running. And he did that all the way when he was even racing his bike as a 17-year-old. And then he turned pro on Jumbo-Visma, and now he's Gravel Star and all this other stuff. But we had a long talk recently about that. And he said that he thought all that cross-country running helped the cardiovascular. So I think, yeah, the best athletes are going to be the best at everything. But I don't see why it would harm you in any way to do multiple sports, for sure. Maybe not rugby, right, but
or American football.
Yeah, American football, you're probably going to get, unless you're a kicker, but even then you're not really,
I mean, you can still pull your leg.
You can still pull your leg, yeah.
So I have a question about how do you deal with like setbacks such as injuries? Like,
yeah,
I see everybody's shaking their head now. Okay, there you go.
So the thing about, yes, I'm glad you brought that up because that was something I was thinking about today when I was riding. So I'm a fanatic about bike fit. I have a really, really bad back. I ripped and tore and damaged 2 discs in my back when I was 18 years old, when I was in college during a sprint workout. It's another discussion. But so I'm really fastidious about my fit. I've done a lot of bike fits in my day on the juniors that have come over to Europe, surprisingly, because you would think that, oh, they've had this fantastic fit and they're really, really good. No, it doesn't. Sometimes they're just really, really good and they have a really bad bike fit. So I think with juniors, especially the younger ones, you guys are growing. So finding a fitter that can help you to be as neutral as possible on the bike, meaning all those rules of thumb that we have about the knee over the pedal spindle and all that kind of stuff, and the ball of the foot and cleat fitment. That's really important, and try to keep it as neutral as possible for a long period of time because you're going to grow. And so the pros get fit almost every single year. And a lot of it is because they're coming out of juniors, their bodies are totally changing. And you kind of need a refinement. The refinement may mean nothing, which is great, or it may mean a little bit lower, a little bit higher, or whatever. And there's obviously fit has changed in our day. If you look at Greg LeMond and everyone from the 80s and 90s, the fit was really far back. If you just looked at it like they were reaching for the pedals, it looked like they were really far back behind the pedal spindle. Now everyone is moving forward. So there are these, trends that happen. For you guys, try to be as neutral as possible and find a fitter that can perhaps give you a few fits a year at a lower rate because you're a junior. So you could just get checked every now and then. I had a friend of mine who went through some stuff with injury, and he messed around with his bike fit and he felt more comfortable on the bike, but he wanted to just get it checked again. So he went and paid $200 and $300 to this really good bike fitter that's here in Northern California. And the bike fitter didn't change anything. He's like, he's like, this is working for you. This is great. Okay. Didn't charge him. He only charged him like $150 instead. But I asked him later, I was like, you spent all that money. He's like, but that peace of mind was worth $150. And he was older. I mean, he was 50, so things had changed in his body. But for you guys, like, if you can find someone that can help you with your fitting, that would be really, really good because that will prevent injury. For those of you that are injured, you have to give it time. And with time means recovery. With recovery means sleep. Let your body heal itself. That's really important. I'm a fan of stretching. I'm a fan of yoga. I'm a fan of body weight exercises. And all those little problems that you have in your body, you have to adjust them. No one's symmetrical and no one's perfect on the bike. So what's hurting you needs to be worked on, or the body part that you had that's hurt, that will continue to happen the more and more you ride. So you need to adjust it now.
Okay, anybody else want to jump in? Because I got some good questions too.
Yeah.
I have one more. Oh, sorry.
Besides, yeah, you were talking about bike fit a little bit. Dave has been very adamant about how he hates my shifters. I turn them in a little bit, and I know Patrick does it as well, and Gus does it as well. What do you think about that? And also, my second question would be, for juniors especially, and juniors that, I mean, you've worked with juniors at such a high level, how do you find that they balance like such a professional kind of lifestyle as well as still being like children?
Well, they're still kids. They just get paid more and they buy Rolexes. That's a whole nother story. Yeah, okay. To answer the lever question, I don't know how I feel about that. I find it interesting that people would want to put their forearms in the wind. That doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you want to ride like this? But that's just me. I also don't understand the breaking point, but you have to understand I'm also coming at this from, I'm 51 and I've ridden and pedaled hundreds of thousands of times a certain way. So what's comfortable for me is maybe not comfortable for you. So do whatever is comfortable for you. I can tell you right now that if you tell the protein mechanic that you want your levers like pointed sideways across your bars, he's not going to do that for you. More than likely, no. I've seen that the new levers, the new Dura-Ace levers are really interesting. So they kind of cant a little bit more inwards. A team like Trek Segafredo is actually ahead of that curve with a lot of things. They have this bike fitter that's extremely good out of Scottsdale, Arizona that they work with. So they've moved to narrow bars and shorter cranks. Jasper Stuyven was probably one of the first guys, the old school Belgian guys, to actually adopt a shorter crank. You know, so he's a little bit, he's probably 190 centimeters. So what is that like? He's probably 6 feet tall, give or take, and he's riding 170s. But that may not work for you. You know, so it depends. If you're riding on the mountain bikes, like mountain bikes, they off the shelf, they're 175 millimeter cranks, right? So that's what you're going to get used to. And then you get on your road bike and it's 170s. Like you may not feel it. I would definitely feel it. So it just depends. So how do they balance their lives? Unfortunately, when you're a pro at a really high level, you don't. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of concentration. Now, that being said, you can't, more than likely, a rider is not going to be able to live like a monk for an entire season, right? So you see, and I'll get into that in a second, but you'll see this level of concentration for 3, 4, or 5 weeks leading into a race, like a Grand Tour, for instance. And then, so that's 7 weeks of full concentration, and then those guys go off the rails, like in a good way. Like they eat, they come after, you know, they spend time with their families, they do all these things. Probably one of the best guys to look for Instagram, I'm gonna tout somebody on Instagram, is Robert Hessink. So he rides on Jumbo Visma. This is a guy that has been around the block more times than you guys have raced around in Prospect Park. Like the guy's done everything, and he loves racing his bike. His Instagram is a lot of fun. So he's got a really good balance of life because he's got 2 kids and a wife, and he lives in Andorra, and he's training, and he's always posting beautiful. Like he loves riding his bike. He loves racing his bike. Like he has figured it out. Some riders don't. Some riders don't figure it out. Did I mute myself again? Oh, sorry. So yeah, you're gonna have to figure that on your own. One of the things that I would always ask the kids at so I had this national talent ID camp every single year. I used to, and I'd have the best 20 kids in the country from all the regional camps, and they'd come to this one place in Colorado Springs, and we'd have this long talk, and I'd ask them who's got a hobby outside of cycling, and I was amazed that like 5 kids would raise their hand and have something else that they did, and all they did was ride their bikes. I was like, wow, okay. I think it's really good to do something outside of riding bikes all the time. because you could obsess about it. And then you get analysis paralysis. Do something else. You know what I mean? It's important. You know, if you play an instrument, keep practicing your instrument. If you like reading books, read books. If you like drawing, if you like photography, if you like anything. But it's got to be other than scrolling social media, guys. I'm telling you right now, this is going to eat your brain.
Okay, who's next? Jump in. Who has a question? Daniel, I think you had one maybe? Or Sylvan?
I have another
Anybody?
one. What about weightlifting? Like, or like calisthenics or stuff like that? Is
Yep.
it like, would you say it's bad, or could it make you faster in a way to do weightlifting or other stuff like that?
Nothing you do is bad. Nothing you guys are going to do is bad. So weightlifting at a certain age, lifting super heavy weights. Yeah, I don't know about that. Body weight exercises and calisthenics and box jumps and plyometrics and things like that. Absolutely do them. I'm a really big fan. So I had a friend of mine who is a CrossFitter, but high level. You could take that for what it's worth, but he's really, really good and a very good athlete. And I asked him one day, I was like, okay, man, if I could do 2 exercises, what should I do? Because he knows I ride bikes. And he's like, you should do deadlifts and kettlebell swings. It's like, that's all you need to do. I was like, what? Like, that's it? I was like, no squats, no nothing. He's like, you don't have to do squats anymore. He's like, you already have all leg strength. And he went through it for me, and he explained why. He's like, deadlifts, because it's all the whole trunk, right? It's an all body movement. And you could do that at home with you don't have to have a lot of weight. You could do kettlebells and you can do dumbbells, and you don't have to do a lot. But if you go through the movement now when you're younger, even just going through the movement, like deadlifts are a lot easier to do with some weight because it's just the movement of it. But kettlebell swings, like, it's a great thing because it's all thrust, and it works your core and it works so much of your body. You don't have to do a lot of them, but imagine, if you did like 20 a day or 30 a day, and then you add up the year, right? So I'd have this question all the time, like, how many guys do sprint workouts? Right? Everyone's like, I do sprint workouts. Cool. How many sprints a week do you do? I don't know, like 10, 12. Okay, cool. So what if you did 2 sprints every single day? Starting on January 1st. How many would you have by March? Simple math. It's 90, right? How many ways are there to win a bike race? 2. Yeah. So it's just little things like that. So yeah, I think weightlifting is really good for you. When you get older and when you get more mature and your body is ready to lift heavier weight, yes, definitely. When you're in team pursuit, you're going to have to lift weights a lot. If you're racing on the track at a high level, team sprint, obviously those guys are footballers on wheels. You're going to have to lift, but for right now, body weight for you guys is great. And any kind of system, any kind of routine that you do every single day is fantastic.
Daniel,
Thank you.
what question you have, Daniel? Jump in here.
That was a question. Either I should do weighted exercises or body weighted exercises. So
How old are you?
I'm 17.
Yeah. I think you can probably start lifting with some weights. I think getting like dumbbells and kettlebells would be great. Going to the gym every single day and doing 300 squats, like, no, you don't need to do that. But I think having those things around and incorporating it into your whole year, actually. So a lot of people, they'll lift, which is what we used to do back in the day. We'd lift, like, I would start lifting October 1st. And I was doing a lot of track. And I would kind of stop in March. That's changed now. Like, a lot of guys will lift throughout the whole year, especially with body weight. And by lifting, I'm not saying multiple deadlifts and multiple, like, they're doing body weight stuff and they're really keeping up on that injury prevention. And really, that's what it comes down to, is like, you're maintaining strength, but you're maintaining the injury prevention, because it's all these small muscles that you need to work on. Cycling is very, it's not dynamic. It's straightforward. Your legs are always in one position. Like, if you guys ever go for a hike and all of a sudden you have to move side to side and you're like, I'm exhausted, that's because you don't use those muscles. You're not going side to side. But all those little stabilizing muscles are helping the big muscles force power through the pedals. So think about that when you're doing your body weight stuff. Like, you may be working on muscles you don't really think you need to, but you do. because they're stabilizing all the big muscles that you actually need. You know, like I generate a lot of power through my glutes and my back of my hamstrings, just because of my position. So I need to do a lot of deadlifts to kind of maintain that. Otherwise, my back will go out of whack. So if you have an injury like in a knee or something like that, or if it's an IT band, like you're going to have to talk to a physical therapist and see the exercise you need to do and just do them the whole year. Totally.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I'm looking at
Okay.
Patrick's setup down there. There's a lot of tires.
Yeah.
Sadly, they're not race-oriented tires. It's more just like supporting normal people biking on my college campus. But
Right on.
I can use the room.
Good.
I have a question. For someone who is not, I guess I'm like coming off of puberty. I'm 19, turning 20. When do you think that dedication to like 8 hours of sleep is starting to taper off? Because, I'm like a busy college student, whatever. I could be training a little more. Like I'm not doing 20-hour weeks. I'm doing like 13. And like, yeah, should I be prioritizing? Should I just be taking that 8 hours and locking that in and then planning my training after that? Or do you think it's like getting flexible at this point?
Yeah, that's a tough one because of the things you need to do. And I remember what that was like in college, and it's hard to kind of maintain that balance. So there are times when you're gonna have to sneak in a nap when you can. It really depends on the level of training that you're doing. If you're doing 13 really, really hard hours, then yeah. If you're doing 13 hours of zone 2, and you're riding through and you're getting your endurance through that, you can probably lighten up, but school is probably the most important thing. So that's the priority, which it really, really should be. I know there's a question about zone 2 and, zone 2 compared to trainer road and all these HIIT workouts and things like that and intervals. Yeah, I'm a really, really big fan of zone 2. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do harder efforts though. There was an interesting podcast or interview with Inigo San Milan just recently, and he's a really big proponent of zone 2, but he has a hard day in there, even at 55 years old. And I think that same thing for you, Patrick. Like, it depends on your day, it depends on your week. Try to get as much sleep as you possibly can, but yeah, school is number one, and then school, riding, girls, sleep. I understand, it's or whatever. Yeah, just do what you can when you can.
What about latest fads, such as like ketones or
Yes.
there's certain kind of things going on, and what other fads, maybe not fads, or what other things are on the horizon that you might see? Because some good stuff to talk about.
Yeah, no, so that was a good question. I saw that question and was like, what do you think the trends are going to be, or what do you think the future is going to be? So ketones is an interesting one. So I know that sometimes I wish I didn't know all the things that I knew, but there are some teams that are really, really heavily into ketones. They also have scientists on their team, and they're also $30 million pro teams. So for you to experiment with ketones, I really wouldn't recommend it. I think there's a little bit of obfuscation there, Dave. Also, I think a lot of these teams are playing F1. So I'm a really big Formula One fan, and Formula One is known for throwing out false information. And I know some of these teams like Ineos and Jumbo and DSM, they have people in them from F1. So they're going to say and do things and put something out there that I've spending some time over, especially in the same complex as DSM. I'm like, yeah, that's not what's actually happening, but that's okay. They're trying to all play this game with each other. That isn't to say that they're not using ketones. I think that they are. And I've heard some crazy rumors and I've actually seen some things, but I don't think it's really good for younger riders. I think the main thing is really just to concentrate on the most balanced diet you could possibly have. But don't really restrict. I used to be a lot harder on the kids when I first started, and wanted them to lose weight. And I realized like that's not going to work. I can't treat these guys like pros. You guys aren't pros. You're growing, and so you should eat as much as possible. That's to say, eat well though. Try to stay away from sugar. if you can. Like that's really the main thing. Refined sugars is probably like the worst thing for you. But in terms of fads, so it's interesting you bring that up. So I was recently at CES, which is the Consumer Electronics Show, which is the, everyone shows their 100-inch television, among other things. But they had a lot of wearables and sports tech there that was really fascinating. I think the future will be who can bring that data in the best and have the best coach that's able to parse it. I think that's the future. So you're seeing these Jumbo and Ineos, they use these core body temperatures that they clip on. They're monitoring their core. There's glucose monitoring. We started with heart rate. There's power. There's all sorts of stuff. But no one has really made a platform that's able to funnel all this data in and give a precise estimation of the athlete and the effect on the athlete. Not just yet. I think the future, I would never bet against technology. Technology always gets better. The software will always get better, and the people looking at it will always get better. So I think that's really the future, unfortunately, because I think what's going to happen is that you're losing a little bit of art of coaching. And then it all comes down to this optimization. Everyone wants to throw that term around, but I don't know what that means. It's optimization for when exactly and compared to when, right? Like peaking is going to be really, really hard for you guys. Peaking for nationals is an art. That's really hard to do. So I think when the software and the data gets better, that will be easier. And in a way, it'll almost equate like a TT bike across the whole field. Everyone has the same exact TT bike. If everyone has this software and they're able to compute and put everything in, but it's really dependent on the data. And the data right now coming off wearables is questionable at best. Like an iWatch is accurate, but it's not that accurate. Glucose monitors are accurate, but what is it telling you for a sportsman? So it's interesting to me to see. We'll see. We'll see what happens. 10 years ago was oval chain rings.
I have a question about that. Just you're talking about wearables, and there's like all these wearables like Whoop and Aura Ring and
The Whoop.
so many others. Like, what is your opinion on those kind of the like HRV, very like focused on resting heart rate and like the REM sleep, tracking REM sleep and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. My question to you is, who's telling you you're where you need to be? Right? That's a simple question. So you're spending $35 a month for this thing, and it's telling you this data, and who's parsing it for you? Yeah. So it's like writing term papers, but you're just writing them to write them. You're not handing them in for a grade. That's the way I kind of look at it right now. I think Whoop has done a very, very good job of spending their venture capitalist money well and of sponsoring certain people. I've talked to some scientists about it, and the data is questionable at best. I don't think that I'd rather see $30 a month go to a bike race entry fee. I think that's money that's better spent for you right now. I think if you get on a pro team that has Whoop and has scientists and data scientists and coaches that can tell you where you're supposed to be, great. That being said, I have seen it predict COVID, which is pretty amazing for certain people. I tried, Amazon had a Halo at one point. I still have it. It's called the Halo, and it's a wearable, and it tracked all this stuff and sleep temperature and all these things. But I can tell you, Wolfie, I know that if I have a couple of beers, I'm not going to sleep well that night. I'm also 51. So it's, you know what I mean? It's like, and same thing for Patrick. It's like, man, I got term papers due and I haven't had any sleep this week. And it's like, I don't need a Whoop to tell me I'm not sleeping well at that point. Like everybody kind of knows. That being said, like all that data collection now, because Whoop is 2 or 3 years old. So if you're using it from, let's say it's gotten popular that period of time, if you start using it at 16, by the time you're 21, you have this like breadth of data, and they're able to do something with it and really show you the patterns you need to be in. That's pretty interesting, but I haven't seen that yet. So we'll see.
Anybody else? Because I've got a good, simple question. Anybody want to jump in? This one's really, really simple. It's just straight up nutrition. what is your recommendation for what kids should have on the bike? And potentially, I'm just going to voice this. I really don't think anyone should be taking any supplements because that's a slippery slope times 1,000. It's just a really simple question of nutrition, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah. What are some
So
kind of guidelines? Yeah.
yeah, so some guidelines. Your body can really only absorb, let's say, 200 or 220 calories, per hour at a certain kilojoule output. Meaning that, so let me go back. We would have these races in Europe, and I know that they were going to be 2 hours and 40 minutes or 3 hours, because that's what junior racing is all, like 135K. It's UCI limited, which I can't do the conversion. I don't even know what that is. It's a lot. It's a lot of miles, but it's like the guys are burning 800 to 900 kilojoules an hour at this level. So it's really, really high, right? So you do the math on that, and it's, you're close to like 2,200 kJs on the day, or 2,400 kJs on the day, and you're expected to sprint at the end of that. Like, that's a normal day in Europe. So to replenish that system and keep that system going, I would like the guys not to use as many goos as possible, or gels. I'm not a big fan of gels personally. That's just me. Who can tell me what maltodextrin is? Any of you? No one knows. No one knows what it is, right? I mean, okay, it's a sugar, but it's sugar. So we had a Swanee. I was lucky enough to work with a soigneur who would make all this food. He worked for BMC. He was a World Tour Swanee, and he was really good. His name was Robert. And Robert would make these little sandwiches, cream cheese and jelly and waffles, and it was real food. And we had this long discussion with the kids before every single race, or before every block, because I would take them over for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. And the guys would load, they'd take like 10 gels and put them in their pockets. And Robert's like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" Because I can't do his Polish accent, but he was funny. He's like, "What are you doing? Next year you're 19. You have to eat real food. You're going to use gels for 270K at Roubaix?" And all the kids would kind of look at him. So his point was, you need to learn how to eat real food on the bike. What I would do for some of the riders that were a little bit tech inept, I would set an alarm on their computers, and at a kilojoule count, and say, hey, it's just a reminder, and the thing would beep at them. It's like, eat something. Because what happens at these races, they're so intense, and some of the races that you've done are super, super intense. You forget to eat and drink. And it's normal. Like, I would go through that. I still go through that now. Like, I get nervous before races, which is amazing at 50 years old, but I still do a little bit. And like, I have to remind myself to eat and drink. So I'm a much bigger fan of real food and the blocks than I am for the gels. I don't know if you guys watch cross this year. You guys watch a lot of cross? Yeah, it's been really interesting. So you've noticed in cross now, 20 minutes in, they're all taking a gel, right? That's just psychosomatic, because it still takes like an hour and a half for that gel to digest. But there is a lot to be said for putting something in your mouth, and there's a trigger in your system that's telling it it's being fed. Yeah, Wolfie, you have a question?
Remco did that at where was it? It was in Norway when he he set like I think one of the best ever calculated watts per kilo, and it was he like halfway through his effort he just popped a gel and like held it in his mouth.
Yeah. So it's this weird saliva trigger, and I forget there's a term for it, but I forget what it is. But it's fascinating. So it's, yeah, for you guys, you need to learn how to eat. Like, it's really important for you guys to learn to eat on the bike. But I think gels are okay, but I wouldn't only eat them. Try to eat other things. And real food is really important, especially when you get older. When you're 17, 18, eat real food, but you have to figure it out on training too. So this is one thing I would see all the time. The guys would ride and they wouldn't eat anything on their training rides. So you're not training your gut. You're not training your gut to get used to that. So a lot of guys would get GI distress. All of a sudden they'd be in a bike race and be like, oh, they're eating in a bike race. Well, they didn't eat for like 5 days beforehand training. You know what I'm saying? Oh, they were definitely eating, don't get me wrong, but they were not eating on the bike when they were training 3 hours, 4 hours a day. Well, you got to train your body to do that. So you always have food with you when you train, and always eat. Don't stop at a cafe and get a croissant, because that's not what you're going to have in a bike race. Try the things that work for you on the bike, whether they're the little stroop waffles or whether they're something light. Like there's prepackaged soft waffles, a little bit of cream cheese, a little bit of jelly, wrap them in foil. Like that's very Euro. That there's a reason why it works. It's easy on your belly. There's a little bit of fat in there, there's a little bit of sugar, and there's a little bit of carb. I think it's a little bit more balanced than a gel. But the blocks are really good as well. I like to stick a block almost like tobacco because I get that same response, the saliva response. Like there's a gel stuck inside of my mouth, and it's telling me I'm being fed.
So Jed informed us it's called carbohydrate rinsing. I didn't
There
know
you
what
go.
the term was.
Yes, that's right.
So-
That's right, Brad. Thank you, Jed.
Thank you, Jed. Yeah.
See, I've already forgotten. I don't even remember anymore.
What about energy drinks? I mean, I happen to know, actually, this is a discussion that Jed and I came up with. Yeah, I have all these like root canals because of just
Sure.
like what Billy was talking
Me
about.
too. Yep.
From putting sugar in your mouth. But Sylvan, you got a question? Jump in here. Go ahead.
What about proteins? Protein, like, should you be taking in a certain amount of protein a day, or like,
Yeah.
is it good for like it's good for recovery, right? So it's like
It is.
to rebuild like little torn stuff and stuff like that, right?
No, it's exactly right. So a muscle molecule is 98% water and 2% protein, right? Or 2% other. So if you're not hydrating and you're not eating protein, you're not giving your body the necessary building blocks to repair itself. And every time you have a hard workout and you're sore, it's because your muscles are literally torn. So when you go to the gym and you lift weights, or you do a hard gear effort, or you do sprints, or you do whatever that day, and you ride a time trial and your legs are super sore, there are micro tears all along your muscles. That means that they're open. So they want to be filled. So give them the nutrients, give them protein. I'm a big fan of protein shakes. I'm a really, really big fan of them. I'm a really big fan of anything that's NSF certified, which means you will not test positive, which is really important. So it's look for anything that's NSF certified for a protein recovery shake, or just adding protein every day. Yeah, what was your original question? Sorry, Dave, I forgot.
No, it was just simply nutrition-based stuff such as this. Like,
Okay.
because the whole cycling industry pushes us on people, and we have a lot of impressionable people in this call
Yeah.
that think that they need to have so many gels per hour, and I need to have a mix in my bottle. And I don't know if these guys, I'm just going to tell you guys stuff. I'm always like everybody gets bored of listening to me, but I don't know if any of you noticed, but every 15 minutes my computer beeps. And Billy mentioned it. It's because I have it set to beep every 15 minutes so I remember to drink. Because
Yeah.
I can go on a 4-hour ride and not touch my bottle.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the whole questions were basic nutrition stuff, because we're fed this, like, you got to have energy drinks, you got to have gels, and the gels have to have caffeine, which I'm telling you guys, don't do that. Don't do caffeine.
Yeah.
Sylvan's question's perfect. What kind of protein recovery? Because this stuff is just around, the marketing is billions of
Yeah.
dollars a year. And
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that so I myself am really prone to cramping, as well as some athletes that I've worked with are prone to cramping for whatever reason. And so I prefer a really salty, higher salt content in my water bottle. But I'm not eating anything out of my bottle, meaning I'm not putting like a carbohydrate mix into my bottle. I eat my food and I drink my hydration. And you should be going through a bottle an hour. Like that's the rule of thumb. That also depends. I can tell you that when I was in Doha, when I was in Qatar, they were going through a lot more bottles than that because it's super hot. And when you guys are racing in Central Park, even early in the morning and it's August, it's going to be hot. So like go through bottles, but yeah, no one's a camel. don't be a camel. Drink as much as you can on the bike. Before, when I was super poor, I used to use honey and salt in my bottle. Like those little tiny little packets of honey, I'd put honey in my bottle. And I don't know if that was good or bad, or at the time when you're super poor and I was in college and that's all you had, I didn't cramp. So something was working, right? And then Cytomax comes around and all these other companies come around, and yeah, they, like Dave said, they're telling you to take all this stuff. Well, Cytomax never worked for me. It was like the worst thing ever for me. But I would constantly use it because my teammates were like, Cytomax the best. I was like, no, I stuck to water, and sometimes I put salt in it. Like salty water worked for me. And I know that sounds gross, and it is gross, but it's like I didn't cramp, and I prefer, I really like goo products personally. That's just my personal thing because they're easy on my stomach. So you have to figure out what works for you, the best thing that works for you. So maybe try everything if you can. Don't stick to one thing, but supplements, yeah. So you guys don't need to really, even like a baby vitamin, like I wouldn't even, you don't need to do that. You guys are so young and you're eating so much food, and try for it to be as balanced as possible. The first time I ever got a blood test when I was in college, and I was feeling really, really run down, and I went and got a blood test, and I found out I was anemic. But the only reason why I took an iron supplement, and I take an iron supplement to this day, is because I know scientifically I'm anemic, and I had to get a blood test twice a year. Sorry. And I'm working with this athlete right now. He just sent me his blood test results, and he works inside. He's a programmer. He has a massive vitamin D deficiency because he's on Zwift all the time, and he's always working. And so I recommended, I'm like, okay, for you at 28 years old, you should probably take some vitamin D, because it's not going to hurt. But for you guys, yeah, that's a very slippery slope.
I mean, the big summary here is don't take anything that's in a pill.
Yeah.
And make sure that if you're taking any kind of supplement that it has an NSF certification. And even then, don't overdo it, because these supplements, these things that are in these containers, there's just so much stuff that's in there that you don't need at kind of any age or any level if you're eating correctly. Now, there's a lot of variables. Most of you guys won't know. I'm going to call Billy out on this. I believe he still holds the Ram 4x relay for the Race Across America. I believe that's correct. Yeah,
I do. Yeah.
And I'll tell you a Billy story. I remember I was teammates, or if I wasn't, I was buddies with him at the time. And I think you decided to do Ram with what, like 3 weeks training?
Well, that's a weird story. So I don't know if you guys know the Race Across America. So it starts at the time when we did it, it started in San Diego, rode across the country. We ended up in Atlantic City, and we did it in 5 days and 8 hours with 4 of us. And don't ever recommend that. And if any of you come to me and be like, I'm thinking about doing the Ram, I'm gonna smack you and tell you not to do it. But it's pretty brutal. And I was a replacement rider, and I wouldn't have done it if I had known what it was going to be. But they needed somebody to do it, so I said yes. And I think I was trained for nationals at Redlands, so I was trained for a 1-day race, and then all of a sudden I was in this 5-day debacle. But it's a good story. And I didn't need a ham sandwich for a year after that, because that's all we ate.
It goes into what I was saying. At certain times, there could be reasons to have, high carbohydrate loads in bottles and things, because you're doing specific types of events. But you guys are all juniors. You're never going to race more than, like, around here 90 minutes. Okay, that's like the limit. Sure, there may be 1 or 2 stage races you might do where you're going to get like a total of 6 hours. And it's just so these nutritional things are important, but not for most people. They're not needed, and especially young guys. They're just really not needed.
Yeah, totally. I think, if you're doing a 90-minute race and you have a couple of gels with you, or like, a sleeve of blocks, and you start right on the start line, you have a couple of those blocks, and then you eat them throughout the 90-minute race, like, that's more than fine. Hydration is probably the more important thing for you guys, and staying calm. Being as calm as possible.
All right. So anybody else have any questions? Because we should definitely wrap this one up. Last call.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, you mentioned it very briefly, but you were talking about caffeine and how that's a no. Could you just speak more to that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think that it depends on if you're drinking a lot of coffee or not. You guys are young, and I know the coffee culture has changed. I knew a lot of juniors that came over to Europe, and even they didn't drink a lot of coffee. They'd have like one or two even at 18. I think it depends on I think I started drinking coffee when I was in college or in high school actually, but the caffeine that they're putting in these in these supplements or the gels and everything like that, it's like high test caffeine. Like I don't know where it's coming from. You know what I mean? Like a cup of coffee, I kind of know. And the caffeinated gels, I think in the long term, probably not just the best thing for you. That's all. If you enjoy coffee, it's one thing. And I know a lot of riders that they wouldn't drink a lot of coffee through the week, and then they'd hit a lot of coffee before a bike race, and then they wonder why they were all like frazzled out. Well, they're changing their routine, and that's something you almost never want to do. And that goes to nutrition. In some ways, it goes to nutrition. So when you're traveling for a bike race, and all of a sudden your hotel is right next to a Wendy's, and you're like, oh man, I'm going to Wendy's before the bike race. But you've had oatmeal before every single bike race before then. And then all of a sudden you go to Wendy's and get the Grand Slam, and you wonder why you're going to crap yourself like an hour into the bike race. Like that's the reason why. And so this was something that I'd always tell the kids in Europe, because the diet and the food that you're going to get at these hotels. So we were staying at these hotels, and they're totally different. But one thing is consistent. There's always going to be really good bread. There's always going to be really good butter. More than likely, you're going to be able to get hot water. And we always brought a rice cooker. So we always had rice and eggs. And the guys all of a sudden were living on rice, eggs, and soy sauce. And it was like the simplest thing that we could make. We could make it at any single hotel. Then they'd supplement with bread and everything like that. But they would see so when you guys ever go to a German hotel, there will be like an acre of meat that you can choose from for breakfast, because that's the culture. I would recommend to you to not get the meat before a bike race, because I can tell you how that goes. It doesn't go that well. So don't change your routine. And the same thing with caffeine and gels. Like if you're having a caffeinated gel every single day when you're training, that's one thing. If you're not, and you're taking it for a bike race, don't be surprised if you're jittery and it doesn't go well. But I would stay away from it if I were you. That'd be my recommendation. Stick to lattes and frappa matchas.
Used to be that caffeine was you could get a ban for actually having too much caffeine in your system.
Yeah, it's really high now. I think it's something like 50 shots of espresso is the limit, which is, if you're at that level and you test positive for that, like there's something else you're taking. Yeah.
A bit crazy. So, all right, let's close this guy up. I know I could absolutely listen to Billy for at least another 45 minutes.
I have a lot of stories. We'll have story hour once a month. It'd be kind of fun. Yeah. No, this has been great, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Thank you.
Good deal.
Dave has Dave has my email, and if you guys have any questions or anything like that, like don't hesitate to ask. Like I'm always available. I'm a lifelong development advocate, and I want you guys to get better. So if there's anything I can help with, please. And if you happen to be by 148th and 60th Avenue, about midway down the block on the right hand side, you can say hello to my parents. They're still there in Queens. They haven't left.
Awesome. Cool.
All
right. Thanks everybody. We're gonna wrap it up now, and most of us are probably gonna go to sleep here in the near future.
Yeah, go to sleep. Get some sleep. I gotta go make dinner. See you guys.
All
right. Thanks, guys.